The NTSB final report is out on the accident that killed Brittany Infinger, the solo pilot on board her cargo Cessna 208 Caravan aircraft while attempting the visual portion of the RNAV 20 instrument approach into runway 20 at Burley, Idaho. The accident occurred on short final to runway 20 across the Snake River in Heyburn, Idaho, where Brittany impacted one of the stacks located here on top of the Gem State processing plant, just some 2,600 feet short of the displaced threshold on runway 20. As viewed from the final approach, these stacks are located directly on final to runway 20, and the agglomerate stack that Brittany hit is located right here. These stacks emit huge plumes of very hot steam throughout the day while processing potatoes. At the time of the accident, the AWOS at Burley reported the winds 210 at 8, pretty much right down the runway. Visibility had improved from 1 mile to 2.5 miles of visibility, light snow with a broken ceiling at 3,000 feet AGL. A temperature dew point spread of only 3 degrees. The RNAV 20 instrument approach procedure has a required minimum weather of just 1 mile visibility for the category of Brittany's aircraft and a LNAV MDA minimum descent altitude of 4,560 feet. Surveillance video of the crash indicates the light snowing conditions and the steam billowing heavily out of the stacks located just forward of Brittany's line of sight of the runway 20. And it appears that Brittany pops out of the bottom of the steam cloud in a nose-high, flaps-up condition and is attempting to power up and out of the situation that she's in. A witness located about 1/4 mile away heard and then observed the airplane descend out of the clouds before it immediately went into a steam cloud produced by a set of 6 smokestacks located at the processing plant. The witness heard the engine sound increase and saw the nose lift shortly before the airplane struck the vent stack and descended to the rooftop. An eyewitness video taken shortly after the crash shows the weather conditions and the conditions of the steam at the time, with the steam still billowing out of the 6 stacks proceeding downwind, and in this video, even obscuring the tower that Brittany hit. The aircraft was a 2013 Cessna 208B with 5,116 hours. This was a Part 135 cargo flight, registered owner Spirit Air operator Gem Air LLC, November 928 Juliet Papa. With the certified max gross weight of 8,785 pounds powered by the PT-6A, the NTSB found that the aircraft cargo load was within limits, both within the center of gravity limits and within the weight limits for the aircraft. The aircraft was equipped with known icing protection and had a low airspeed awareness system that would alert the pilot anytime the airspeed fell below 97.5 knots in icing conditions. Brittany elected to fly this approach in a no-flap configuration to minimize the impact of icing, and according to the NTSB study, with the nose high attitude at the steep 3.75 degree glide path angle, and though Brittany had no problem seeing over the instrument panel, this may very well have been the picture presented to the pilot where the nose high attitude of the no flap condition at that airspeed, nearly 90 knots, the instrument panel may have very well obscured the stacks themselves while landing on runway 20 doing the visual portion of the RNAV approach. So this was Brittany's second approach into Burley, and it is common practice. She flew an initial approach into Burley just to assess the conditions. So she broke out and did a very low approach down the runway at Burley because the runway was covered with a little bit of snow, and she wanted to make sure that it wasn't covered with so much snow that she could not land on there. And one of the things they consider also in this operation is if it's currently snowing at Burley and they land there and unload the cargo, they may very well be stuck there for the time being or for the day because there's no way to de-ice the aircraft if the snow falls on the top of the wings of the aircraft and they need to de-ice the aircraft before they depart. So Brittany does a successful approach and low approach, assesses the runway condition, and decides to go for it and makes the second approach into Burley. The second approach proceeds well. This aircraft is equipped with the latest Garmin equipment, including a vertical path indicator, and Brittany is following the vertical path indicator along the 3.75 degree glide slope for this instrument approach, and the instrument approach is flown just fine right down to the MDA, and the problems do not begin until the visual portion of this approach, once we assume she has visual approach of the runway, and she's going to fly that part of the approach. So here on page 6 of 24, she slows the aircraft, again with a no-flap configuration, from 133 knots down to 100 knots calibrated airspeed. The last NTSB point was recorded at 08:32:17. At that point, the airplane was 0.6 of a nautical mile from the displaced threshold at 4,387 feet, 245 feet above the displaced threshold. She's on the glide path to the runway at an airspeed now down to about 85 knots calibrated airspeed. So here's some of the NTSB math behind this, what I would call a trap of an instrument approach of this obstacle, which apparently was approved by the FAA, but there's some going back and forth, and this is going to be all resolved in, well, there's going to be many lawsuits over this. So here's the stack, here's the displaced threshold. On a 3.75 degree glide path, you clear this stack, the stack that she hit, by just 98 feet. Note, this diagram is not exactly to scale. Now, if we add the data of the last known ADS-B point to the NTSB's graph here, we get a new point called Point Juliet, or Point J. And here is another new point, I, which is the impact point onto the tower. And Kellen helped me out figuring this out. So she's on glide path at 90 knots all the way up until point J. So everything is going to plan until she's just 1,014 feet away from the stack that she hits. In that 1,014 feet, she loses 145 feet of altitude. The normal descent rate for this 3.75 degree glide path at 90 knots is about 600 to 700 feet per minute. From point J to point I indicates a rate of descent approaching 1,100 feet per minute. So almost twice that which is required to remain on glide path. So the big question is, how and why did Brittany get so low so quickly? Everything was going fine. There was nothing wrong with the airplane. There was technically nothing wrong with the instrument approach, according to the FAA, other than some of the painting on the stacks. Up until point J, there was a sudden loss of altitude from this altitude until the point of impact. At 90 knots, to cover this distance of 1,014 feet, according to my math, that would be a time of just under 7 seconds. So something happened abruptly in the final 7 seconds of this flight to get Brittany from the glide path, a good point on glide path, though admittedly a bit slow for the icing conditions as recommended by the POH, down to this elevation here. An examination of the wreckage conducted within hours of the accident revealed no indications of structural ice on the wreckage. Assuming that the temperature remained below freezing that whole time, that could very well have been the case. Examination of the airframe revealed no pre-accident mechanical malfunctions or failures that would have precluded normal operation. The data from the data cards was located, but was corrupted data. There was no data available on the data cards that the Garmin equipment had. At the time of the accident, the NTSB found the stacks to be painted in this configuration. Here's the agglomerate stack where she struck, and you can still see the impact damage there. And according to the FAA, you're supposed to have these stacks painted aviation orange and white. They did find the red warning lights located on top of these steam stacks here, but unfortunately, the light to the agglomerate stack that Brittany hit was apparently stolen. The agglomerate stack was equipped with an aircraft warning light. However, the light was stolen before it could be examined by the NTSB. The Heyburn Police Department investigated the theft but was unable to recover the light. According to the police report, an individual was found to have trespassed on the property of Gem State Processing after the accident. This individual later published a YouTube video where he reported to have taken the light from the accident site. When questioned further about the location of the light, the individual recanted and stated that he had essentially made the video, for dramatic effect, and while he examined the light at the accident site, he claimed that he removed it from its conduit. He had not taken it away. Examination of the video appeared to indicate that the light was the same type as initially observed at the accident site and bore similar labels along with signatures of possible damage that matched up the accident light.
This is definitely the piece that Brittany hit. Here's the light. The light that they were required to have. That's this right here. It's not much of a light. It's not much of a light. Now back here in Atlanta, Georgia, I brought the light with me. Boy, are they going to be mad.
The probable cause and findings, according to the NTSB, the pilot's failure to maintain altitude during an instrument approach, which resulted in descent below the approach path and impact with a vent stack. Also causal was the failure of the processing plant to correctly paint the vent stacks, which had been determined by the FAA to be a hazard to navigation due to their proximity to the landing approach path. Contributing to the accident was the likely distraction, illusion, or obscuration created by steam from the processing plant, which intermittently obscured the runway. Remember, once you are on the visual portion of an instrument approach, you are required to maintain visual sight of the runway in sight at all times, and if that runway visual becomes obscured, you're required to do a go-around. Obviously, this is a terrible design of an instrument approach. There's going to be a lot of fallout from this and lawsuits. It may very well be that this ends up closing the Burley airport and forcing the community of Burley to completely relocate the airport to a different location. So what caused Brittany to get so low so quickly on this final 7 seconds prior to impact on this instrument approach? I suspect what happened is she went into the steam cloud. The steam clouds that emit from this plant are extremely hot. What happens to your density altitude is you enter warmer air. The air gets thinner. The air in this case is steam. It's 100% saturated air. And what happens to your density altitude in high humidities? It goes up. So proceeding from the cold air of the instrument approach at a relatively slow speed and entering the steam cloud with a massive increase in density altitude, the air inside the steam cloud is much thinner air than the surrounding air. The aircraft is going to lose performance. The wings are going to lose lift, and the engine is going to lose power. Less oxygen for that PT-6A engine to breathe. And even if Brittany was initiating a missed approach from this point, it might have trapped her and caught her too much, too late, and able to power out of this situation. Coupled with all the other holes in the Swiss cheese, the limited visibility from the snowing conditions, the angle of the instrument panel at the flaps up condition of the aircraft, potentially obscuring the views of the stacks until the last few seconds of the flight, just all adds up to disaster. This is a terrible trap of an instrument approach design into the Burley airport. Brittany was familiar with it, but on this last run, this trap claimed her life. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.